Okay, so we've got a beautiful day here, and no better day than to start your outboard servicing. Everyone loves a good how-to video, so why not learn how to overhaul a water pump and gearbox on a Parson 9.8 outboard.
Welcome back to All the Stars Sailing Adventures.
Join us, Rachel and Jess, on our Cavalier 37 All the Stars as we live and learn about life on the water. Hit that subscribe button, guys. I haven't actually pulled the leg off this outboard before. I'm due to replace the water impeller, and I'm also going to be replacing the prop shaft seals. So we had a bit of water getting into the gear oil. It's a milky colour, which is not a good thing. So first thing is to drain the old gear oil out, and then I'm going to take the prop off and check for leaking around there and replace those seals. And then I'm going to do a general service by dropping the leg section down, replacing the water impeller, and we should be good to go. So I've got some clean rags, got all my tools laid out, nice and easy to access. So we've got a gasket kit here, water pump plate, housing, impeller, and a couple of, there's a replacement shaft seals, but also got the whole assembly in case the current one is damaged. I've got a spare O-ring there for that as well. And again, that gear oil is milky, so we know there's still moisture in there when I replaced the oil recently with fresh oil. So while I'm waiting for that oil to drain out, I'm just going to take this split pin and nut off the propeller shaft and disassemble the propeller. Right, so that prop is off the shaft. I've just drained all that gearbox oil out while I waited. The first thing I'm going to do to get this section of the leg off to replace the water impeller, which is in here, the gear shift selector here is what I need to loosen off. So I've got to loosen off that bottom nut there, disconnect this section of the rod with that section. Notice I've got the gear selector in reverse so I can get to that top section. Because it was nicely greased when it was assembled or last touched, it's coming off pretty easily. Okay, you can see how that's separated from that section there. So pinch yourself there, but I'm just selecting the gear selector, and you can see going back to neutral, and we've got that gap there. So that's what we want, and I can go ahead and take off these 4 connecting bolts here, which are 10mm spanner. So see the assembly here for the water pump, that's the water pump housing. And I need to take these 4 bolts out. And while I've got this off, I would really like to drain and flush the oil out of the leg before or at least after I've replaced the prop seals. Because this is a little bit corroded, the shaft is a little bit, maybe it's just carbon build-up from the exhaust. The housing's in good shape. And there's our little bearing plate. Clean all the scale off that. There's the key. So you don't want to lose that little guy. That's a pretty critical bit of gear. So that's just a key weight in there, and that keys into your impeller. Stop it from, or make it spin on the shaft. So I'm going to keep that guy safe. So look, it's basically in good condition. I'll just clean away any sort of scale build up here, and these galleries. And seeing as I've got new gaskets, I'll just replace the gaskets, even though that gasket's not broken. And I'll check the seal underneath this guy too. Now that drive shaft cleaned up really easily. I just had a bit of wet and dry, and any of that rusty scale that had built up just came straight off. When I'll reassemble this, I'm going to coat this in marine grease. So the other seal I want to replace while I got this leg off is the gear selector O-ring seal, which is just here. Now that had a little stainless plate over the top of it, and I'm just cleaning that up with a razor blade, and I'll do the same here. There's a bit of a sort of intermetal reaction here between the alloy and the stainless. So I'm going to clean that up and replace that O-ring with a new one, which I've already ordered, and then I'll be putting that plate back on. I'm going to grease all of these surfaces and the O-ring before I put it back together, so that everything moves freely and these two surfaces don't react as much. I've cleaned up all the surfaces ready for the new O-ring and the new gaskets, and replaced the water seal impeller, the water impeller, and the housing, and then we can bolt this leg back on. And then I'm going to be taking this little coupling off the back of the prop shaft and replacing the seal in there, because I believe I've got a leak here, which is how the water became to be in the gearbox oil. Even though I've cleaned that up, it's still got some sort of rusting reaction there, so I'm going to seeing as I've got a new one, I'm just going to get rid of that and keep that as a spare. This is nice and new and shiny. We're going to be replacing that back on there. That's come up nice and clean. New O-ring, greasing that, and there's our water impeller housing. I don't need to replace the actual housing itself because that one's in good nick, but I will be replacing the gaskets. So whenever I'm using any sort of grease, you should always take it out of the greasing container with a nice clean spatula or a screwdriver that's been cleaned of any debris, because you don't want to be putting anything dirty into your grease container, because you'll end up contaminating your grease, which will not be lubricating. It will then be abrading anything you reassemble. It's nice and snug. Greasing up this entire length of the drive shaft. These holes have to line up, otherwise it's back to front. Okay, so bring it down. Now I'm just going to spin that prop shaft with my left hand, and that just turns those little fins of the propeller, impeller down, and allows me to slide it on. So now that housing's right down the right position. I'll just put our 4 bolts back in, and I usually just use a little bit of grease every time I put anything back into a housing that's salt water. Alright, when you tighten up these bolts, you don't need to tighten the hell out of them, because that's a poly housing and we're only talking really low pressures here. Okay, so our water pump and impeller is all reassembled. New gaskets, new O-ring here in the gear selector rod, and now this can get bolted back onto the base of the stock of the engine, and then I'm going to be taking this guy off. Right, that spacer washer, thrust washer, was quite stuck on there, so I just had to heat that up a little bit with a heat gun to get it to release. Now I've got to try and get that bearing carrier. That's this thing, which new looks like this. I bought a spare one just in case that was too hard to get out and I damage it. But I don't have a bearing puller, so it's going to be a bit tricky without one. We'll see how we go, just trying to tap it out. Now the wonders of a little heat gun. I just heated the housing a little bit there, not too much to burn paint, but that was enough for me to loosen that off. I was able to get a screwdriver in this little lug here, and then the same on the other side, and just gently twist, and we got that bearing carrier to come out. I can replace those O-rings, and hopefully we fix the seal issue. I've got that seal there. That's the sort of main primary seal on the prop shaft. And I'd say there's another one inside here. So I'm going to just push this through. My challenge is to dig that seal out and replace that seal without damaging any surface on the inside of this. Well, as you can see, I've made a bit of a mess of that, trying to get that out. The old oil seal's quite badly rusted, so ended up with some debris coming down into this bearing here on the other side of it, which did have this gear on it. I was able to nudge that out with 2 screwdrivers. So rather than risk having a contaminated bearing going back in, I'm just going to use the full new part that I ordered. It's got the bearing ready to go. I'll reattach this and refit this whole unit ready to go with the new seal in it. And then I might just clean up the old one later and try and keep that as a spare. Beautiful. So that gear's back in there. There was this tiny little ring which goes back in here. Just wiping all the old oil off that because it was a bit dirty. And we need to go this way. Right, back through the seals and we're in. It's the spindle, unit and gear all reassembled. You can see in there, but I've just sprayed in some WD-40 to sort of wash out any of that residual watery oil. So just trying to do my best to clean that out, make it a bit more pure oil environment before we go putting it all back together and filling it back up with gearbox oil. Well, just while we wait for that residual watery oil to drain out of that gearbox, I'm just going to, with a nice clean screwdriver, I'm just going to apply a little bit of grease to the outside of this O-ring surface before I install this back into the engine. The bearing carrier will come out easier next time and go in easier this time, sort of prohibiting corrosion. Now, this little pin here was still inside there. Now that has to go into that position before I insert that back in and line that up with the remaining gear, because the gear selector shaft that comes down, the rod presses on that. Put it into gear. I can put a propeller on there, the means of engaging the gear. Yeah, it's pretty important to evenly tighten these 2 nuts, because you don't want that uneven tension. You don't want to sort of jam it in. Just gradually bringing that in. Right, new seals, cleaned it all out, got a new bearing holder, water pump replaced, new gaskets. She's looking pretty good. I think all I got to do now is refill the oil, refit the prop back on there, split pin and washers, and then the last thing I want to do is just replace the fuel filter, which is not urgent, and I'm about to fire up. See the new seals there, lovely cleaned up prop shaft, everything's greased, ready to go. I've just got to put this thrust washer on. And there we go, put her into gear, that engages. But the neutral one's running nice and smooth. Recommended 80 to 90 weight gear oil, and I know it's 500 millimeters. This thing only takes about 300 milliliters, so I'm going to squeeze 2/3 of this in and then check my levels. Well, that's how we go about replacing the prop seals and the water impeller on a Parsum 9.8 2-stroke. It's been a long day. I've been at it for about 4 or 5 hours. Time to put away some tools. Being a Sunday afternoon, it might even be time to crack open a beer, I'd say. But I hope you found that useful. If you're enjoying our videos, please give us a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe so we can keep you updated.